Hello, my name is Alex Schuko, and this is my dissertation, Culturally Responsive School Leadership, Examining White Male Principals' Practices. My dissertation committee was Chair Dr. Rima Reynolds, Dr. Teresa Saunders, Dr. David Anderson, and Dr. Mohammed Khalifa, currently at the University of Minnesota. The research study contained 5 questions. 1. How do white male school principals critically self-reflect on the actions they take to create equitable learning experiences for Black students and students of low socioeconomic status? 2. What actions do white male school principals take to develop teachers who implement culturally responsive instruction for Black students and students of low socioeconomic status? 3. What actions do white male school principals take to create a culturally responsive and inclusive school environment for Black students and students of low socioeconomic status? 4. What actions do white male school principals take to engage the families and communities of Black students and students of low socioeconomic status? 5. How do the white and masculine self-identities of a white male school principal aid or hinder him in enacting culturally responsive school leadership for Black students and students of low socioeconomic status? So I looked at 2 distinct groups of students, Black students and students of low socioeconomic status. The study included the Culturally Responsive School Leadership Framework by Khalifa, Gooden, and Davis. The framework includes 4 leadership behaviors: critically self-reflection, developing culturally responsive teachers, promoting a culturally responsive and inclusive school environment, and engaging students, parents in the Indigenous community context. Under each behavior, there are specific actions. Some of those are captured in this table. I studied principals in an exurban school setting, following Griffin's definition. Such communities are places where tractors and farms, the latter quickly being brought up by developers, mingle with shiny new cars, big new houses, and diverse families in search of the American dream of economic prosperity. They are places where Black and white families have surprisingly similar income levels. Nonetheless, the schools in these communities still have significant racial gaps in achievement and discipline, not unlike the majority of schools in the country. Each participant was provided this definition and agreed that his community met the definition. I studied 4 participants, 1 elementary principal, 1 middle school principal, and 2 high school principals. I collected 3 forms of data: an interview, a review of the school handbook, and a review of each principal's school-based social media communication on Instagram, Facebook, and our Twitter between April 2019 and the summer of 2019. You'll see at the top of this table the 5 research questions. In the middle of this table, you'll see the individual themes for each participant, looking at those 3 sources of data. At the bottom, the cross-cutting themes. Under critical self-reflection, that the participants showed personal to instructional critical self-reflection. Under developing culturally responsive teachers, there was a common theme of providing some level of social justice, professional development to at least some teachers in the building. Under culturally responsive school environment, each principal, for the most part, talked about challenging and exclusionary practice. Under engaging students, parents, and the Indigenous context, that these principals use school-based communication methods. And under whiteness and masculinity, that each white male principal talked about having a privilege and a responsibility to support Black students and students of low socioeconomic status. So each of these principals were white males. There were 3 parts of the conceptual framework. First, the key model. And the key model was developed by Scott and Robinson. It is a model of white male development. 2 of the participants identified as an empirical type male, 2 an optimal type male. They talked about acknowledging privilege that came with being a white heterosexual male. However, each of the males fell short of really acknowledging their personal role or their role in institutional racism. Second, was critical race theory. Within this part of the conceptual framework, the participants talked about windows, mirrors, and hallway displays, that they had showed diverse representations of characters in books, to some degree in part of the curriculum, or on a hallway display in their school. Yet, their school handbooks included exclusionary meritocratic policies, including administrative privilege. For example, the dress code policy and some of the handbooks gave administrative privilege. That there was some evidence of a participant showing deficit thinking for students who are black or low socioeconomic status. In regards to parent engagement, that these participants were not intentional with engaging black parents or parents of low socioeconomic status to improve their school. This is representation of epistemological racism. Yet, there were also participants who talked about tokenism, the fear in not knowing how to engage black families to improve their school when there are so few of them in the community. The third part of the conceptual framework was culturally responsive school leadership. The data showed a couple of things. One, participant history and epistemological bias, that the participants reflected, however, their reflections did not center race. They showed a consciousness of being a white male without talking about how being a white male influenced their leadership practice. Humanizing minoritized students. They talked about wanting to protect these students, but that needs to also be juxtaposed with this messiah mentality. There was unintentional engagement talked about. Some participants talked about strategies to develop peer networks, in particular for black students. But when we think about that, we must also understand and be mindful of tracking. Student behaviors from identity was encapsulated in the handbook review. Under funds of knowledge, these participants overall did not intentionally engage black families and families of low socioeconomic status, showing that maybe they did not fully value the cultural capital of those families. I'll talk more about social media in a bit. The key model, culturally responsive school leadership and critical race theory, included implications. Under key model, this was a novel experience for the participants. They had never seen it. They could not talk about how being a white male extended to leadership practice. Under culturally responsive school leadership, they showed an interest to be culturally responsive and a vision to create a welcoming school without consistent leadership practices to support that. Under engaging minoritized students and families, here are some ideas to promote that: using equity teams, parent collaboration, and resolving cultural isolation to develop racial literacy by finding common liberating spaces to engage with minorities. Under critical race theory, we must also consider intersectionality and promoting counter narratives by sharing the stories of our minoritized students and families. Future research possibilities. This study looked at self-reported school principal actions. It would have been strengthened if I would have included student and family data. We could also study culturally responsive school leadership versus traditional leadership practice and do a comparison using student achievement and discipline data to actually look at a quantifiable or measurable impact. Setting participants and students. I was very specific in the setting participants and students in this study, but again, we must also consider intersectionality. Social media, I took a cursory look. We can look at social media use by building principles in districts where students and families really seek it, not only to find information, but to be affirmed. And we could also look more closely at the substance of posts to see if they show superficial representations of diversity or real humanization and inclusion. And finally, school principal access to culturally responsive training. More investigation needs to be done to see how principals get access to culturally responsive training and how these networks of culturally responsive practitioners are developed, maintained, and grown. If you have any questions, please contact me. Again, I am Alex SchukowA. You can reach me at aschukw@emis.edu.